Article 2, Section 19. Chirp Headquarters, 2 years before Election Day. Jerry Neville pulled up a screen. At the top was a photograph of a young woman. The rest of the screen was filled with a complicated array of numbers and symbols. Neville turned to the two employees he had called to the meeting, Deshaun Thompson and Sahil Patel. Neville had approached each of them in person during the day to inform them of the secret after-hours discussion to be held in Neville's own office. I'm going to show you guys how I've used machine learning for what I call the actuation of preferred behavioral patterns. It's going to be your job to improve on my work. If you can produce a successful proof of concept, you will each receive 15% of the company that launches this technology. Leaning forward in their seats, the duo stared at Neville. Let me make this perfectly clear, Neville continued. You make me a working prototype, and I'll make you rich men. Known in his youth as the Baltimore boy wonder, Dr. Deshaun Thompson, Ph.D., looked younger than his 48 years. He was built like a middleweight boxer, which was something he had once aspired to be. The newspapers reported that the esteemed neuropsychologist had grown up in the streets of West Baltimore. That was true, to a point, but it was more accurate to say that he grew up in the city's public libraries, where he had fallen in love with the science of the brain. Still, Thompson always gave an amused snort when he was asked if a brainy kid like himself had faced bullying from the kids in his neighborhood. His wicked jab, followed by a vicious right cross, nipped the bullying problem in the bud. He had learned that move from repeatedly studying slow-motion video of prize fights. Hours of practice in front of his bedroom mirror solidified the skill. If he could develop that level of skill without instruction, Thompson could only dream of what he could accomplish with professional training. I ain't gonna watch nobody beating on a brain like yours, his uncle said when the young Deshaun showed up for training at Thompson's gym, the Baltimore Boxing Academy his uncle had founded. Yale University, by contrast, was eager to train Thompson. A full scholarship was his for the asking. 10 years after getting his Ivy League Ph.D., Jerry Neville came into Thompson's life. Since earning his degree, Thompson had been dazzling the business world with his scientific prowess. Neville had heard rumors of the scientist responsible for the success of a company called 4 Aces Gaming Devices out in Carson City, Nevada. Soon after Neville got Chirp off the ground, he was determined to hire Thompson away from his employer. Neville attended a gambling industry convention to meet the man himself. Dr. Thompson's lecture to the convention attendees was well attended. He described just how addictive his video poker machines had become and bemoaned the state laws that were being passed to regulate the design features that promoted continued play. What legislators called preventing gamblers from going broke and ending up on the taxpayer dole, Thompson called limiting personal freedom. In a private conversation with Neville over coffee, Thompson had revealed still more. He had come to the gambling business after getting a start in the food industry. There, he designed a way to use brain scans to measure neural activity to help the General Snack and Treat Corp design a more appealing version of their Del Ranchero chips. It wasn't long before General Snack's food scientists learned exactly how to produce a chip that would make consumers eat one bag after another of their cheese-flavored corn chips. Having so successfully padded General Snack's bottom line, other corporations began to hear about Thompson's wizardry. Soon, General Snack was outbid for Thompson's continued services by the 4 Aces. Users of Thompson-designed gambling machines came to realize just how absorbing the experience would be when they sat down to play. Some would become so entranced by the machine that they would forget their own bodies as the hours passed. Some wore adult diapers to the casino to make sure that when they finally emerged from the trance, they were not sitting in a puddle. Occasionally, players who sat in place for days in a row would develop blood clots in their legs. Those clots would sometimes migrate through the big veins of the body, past the heart's right atrium, and lodge into the user's lungs, causing a dangerous and sometimes fatal pulmonary embolism. Ambulance crews came to hate calls to the casino. Players nearby hated to emerge from their machine gambling trance to give the paramedics room to work. Thompson called the design elements that caused his customers to spend days at a time feeding their paychecks into slot machines player-focused design. The goal of that design was to get users to play to extinction, meaning playing until they had gone broke and maxed out their credit, foisting their ruined finances onto Las Vegas taxpayers. Over coffee, Neville described to the psychologist his idea for Chirp. The psychologist sat very straight in his chair. He took off his glasses and closed his eyes, thinking about the social network that had just been detailed to him. For more than 2 minutes, the pair remained seated in silence. When Thompson's eyes reopened, they were beaming. He grabbed a napkin and set to work explaining his ideas. The way I see it, the system you're describing offers 3 types of reward. First is novelty. You never know what you're going to see next in a system like yours. Second is being told by a crowd, you were right all along, about your take on some issue or other. Third is the opportunity to punish those who deviate from your beliefs on some matter. We've studied just how rewarding that last 2 can be. People just love to be told they were right, but they love to punish outsiders even more. Best yet, we can use techniques that we've already developed in the gambling industry. For instance, we'll adjust the frequencies and intensities of those rewards for maximum impact. What do you mean? If you want to keep someone using your service, you have several ways to reward them for doing so. It's not just the number of times the user is rewarded that keeps him using. It's also how frequently, how predictably, and how intensely he is rewarded. You can play with those variables to maximize the user's pleasure and consequently maximize his usage. How would you do that? Neville asked. Take, for instance, the near-miss effect. We used it to keep players playing in the casinos. As you know, a slot machine pays off when you line up certain symbols on the pay line. Obviously, winning will keep players playing, but a machine that wins too much is not a profitable machine. That makes what happens when the player loses so very important, Thompson said with a sly smile. What do you mean? Players are far more likely to try again after they lose if the winning symbols land on spots very close to the pay line. It makes them feel like they were just this close to winning, Thompson said, holding his finger and thumb very near to each other. We also discovered that if we adjusted when and how often those near misses happened, we could increase player use even further. How? What we would do is make these near misses happen with increasing frequency over the course of a playing session. What would that do? It would make the player think she was getting better at the game. She would come to feel as if she would master the game with enough practice. Of course, no such thing was happening, but it kept her at it until player extinction. It's like Nietzsche wrote, Neville said. Happiness is the feeling that power increases, that resistance is being overcome. Neville hired Thompson on the spot. That decision paid off, giving Chirp a big early advantage over its social media competitors. If happiness was the feeling that power increases, Chirp was going to give users that feeling in abundance. As a user's time on the site increased, Thompson rewarded them by having their chirps liked or reposted with increasing frequency. That feeling of increasing mastery resulted in increased use of Chirp. Neville's profits and stock prices soared. As a bonus, Neville's Vegas trip yielded Patrick O'Connor, a security expert who specialized in identifying card counters and cheaters who are trying to hide their identities. His facial recognition and gait analysis technologies kept casinos' profits safe. Neville realized that applying Dr. Thompson's ideas would require more brain power than any small group of human beings could muster. To supply the computational power, Neville brought in Dr. Sahil Patel to the project. Unlike Dr. Thompson, Dr. Patel was no child prodigy. In fact, he seemed typical of the Indian programmers that Neville hired by the dozen. Instead, Neville noticed the cleverness and elegance of the young, skinny Bihari programmer's code. Neville deduced that that level of coding expertise indicated clear, precise, and strong thinking. When it was time to recruit a programmer for this special project, Neville knew just who to call. Dr. Patel's job was to translate Thompson's technique into a language that Neville's machines could understand. The machines would then spot the patterns in individual users' online behavior and see how Thompson's interventions might improve on Neville's work. If Dr. Patel did his job right, then the machines wouldn't be guessing when they decided how stimuli should be applied in order to change users' offline behavior. Neville pointed at the screen full of numbers. Do either of you know what this is? Neither one did. It describes a special kind of shape, Neville said, answering his own question. Looks like a bunch of numbers to me, said Thompson. I'd show you a picture of it, but I can't. It's a special kind of shape in 22-dimensional space. It's called a polytope. A what? It sounds complicated, but it's really not. What do you call a shape in 2-dimensional space, like a square or a triangle? A polygon. Right. What do you call a shape in 3-dimensional space, like a cube? I should remember this from junior high school geometry, Thompson said. He paused for a moment. Oh yeah, it's a polyhedron. Right. This figure here has more than 3 dimensions, so we call it a polytope. I'm having trouble with the idea of more than 3 dimensions. I can't picture it. Don't worry about that. Neither can I, Neville answered. Do you know what a dimension really is? Not really, Thompson admitted. Let me put it to you this way. A dimension is how many numbers you need to describe the position of a point in a particular space or shape. A line has 1 dimension. All you need is 1 number, and you can find an exact point in any line. If you have 2 dimensions, like a piece of graph paper or the surface of the Earth, you need 2 numbers to find an exact point, the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate, latitude and longitude. This room is 3-dimensional. If we want to find an exact point in it, we need 3 numbers: length, width, and height, the x-coordinate, the y-coordinate, and the z-coordinate. Our 22-dimensional polytope here is no different. You just need 22 numbers to find our point. I'm not picturing it, Thompson said. You might not be able to picture it in your mind, but picturing it isn't what's important. What's important is that we can do mathematics on it. What does that have to do with influencing behavior? Each of our users' personalities and personal situations is converted into one of these polytopes. We call it a personal form. The particular polytope on the screen is from the personal form of a woman we'll call Jane Doe. Each of the dimensions is a measurement of some personality characteristic or aspect of our personal situation. We also have a catalog of what we call goal forms. Those goal forms correspond to the personality characteristics and personal situations of a person who would behave as we might want Jane here to behave. Neville grabbed 2 sheets of paper. He folded one of them. Think of it as getting this rectangle to resemble that rectangle by adding a bit to this side and trimming a bit from that side. Only we have a lot more sides going in a lot more directions. Some of the directions are rather inflexible. Very little can be done to change them. We don't bother with those. But some of the dimensions are quite pliable. Those are the ones we can work with. Given the right stimuli, our subject's personal form and our goal form can be made to coincide surprisingly closely. It's not long before the behavior we want manifests in the world. We call this process ripening. The 2 scientists sat staring at Neville. I'm not sure I get it, said Patel. It's really not that different from what you do when you try to get somebody to change their behavior in the real world. You might want to sell a widget, or to get your boss to give you a raise, or to get a woman to go on a date with you. It's just that when you're doing it in the real world, your approach is hit or miss. With this technology, we know exactly what we're working with, and as a result, we can have a very good guess about exactly what stimuli to apply, where to apply them, and when. We're far surer to get the results we want. It sounds like you're trying to bash a square peg into a round hole, Patel noted. That's not what we're doing. Let's say you have a behavior you want to elicit. Look at Miss Doe here. Let's say you want her to develop a romantic interest in a particular guy. What would you do? You would find a way to transform her personal form into a goal form that would behave like a woman in love with that guy. It takes some pretty sophisticated mathematics to compare the personal forms and the goal form and figure out which adjustments are most likely to produce results and what order to do them in. But we have found ways to solve the necessary equations. It still sounds like you're bashing a square peg into a round hole, Patel maintained. No, Neville shot back. For each of the behaviors we want to elicit, we have a catalog of thousands of these goal forms. All of the goal forms in the catalog will manifest the behavior we want. We figure out which one is closest to where Miss Doe is right now, and then we move her in the direction we want her to go in. We're not banging a square peg into a round hole. We're trimming a square peg a bit to fit into a slightly rectangular hole. What do you need us for? I've experimented with this technology for some time now, Neville began. Wait, is that why you're with? Thompson began. Neville glared at Thompson, who regretted even thinking about Meghan Peters in this context. As I was saying, I've experimented with this technology for quite some time. The Chinese government has expressed interest in using it, and I've teamed up with them to implement strategies where they can get the behaviors they want from their citizens. People think the Chinese regime wants to mistreat its citizens. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Chinese simply want their people to be good citizens. Like a stern father, they have to use punishment in order to maintain order. If we solve the problems with the technology, governments will have less need to punish their citizens. What are the problems with this technology? Patel asked. The problem is that technology often works only temporarily. I recently met with Ambassador Shen Hong. He told me that the program's effects just don't last. Worse, they can't predict who is going to relapse into anti-government beliefs and activities. I want you to extend my work and make my system provide lasting changes, preferably permanent changes. Neville turned back to his computer. He double-clicked the photograph of Jane Doe. The sturdy-looking woman in the photo smiled at the camera. She was wearing her college's track and field uniform. In one chalk-covered hand, she was holding a shot put. In the options screen that popped up next, Neville double-clicked an icon shaped like a red heart. Article 2, Section 20. Hedrick Summit Dorm, UCLA, 2 years before Election Day. Meghan Peters grimaced as she rubbed her forehead. Why won't you just tell them I won't take the role? You're my agent. You need to represent me. There was a pause. Meghan sat at her desk, her phone pressed against her ear. Tell them I just don't have enough time for rehearsal. They want me to go to a voice coach to learn a French accent. I've got a full pre-med course load this semester. In 2 weeks, I have an organic chemistry midterm. A pause. I'm going to be a doctor. I've told you that before. Being taken seriously as an artist isn't my priority right now. I can always do that after graduation. Meghan paused again for more exasperated listening. Yes, I'm with the program. But medicine is number one. Acting is a hobby. You want to get me a role? During the semester, I'll only take easy stuff. Another pause. You can convince people I've got both brains and beauty. That message will sell. Another pause. I don't care what worked for your other clients. Do this for me. Meghan hung up, powered off her phone, and looked behind her. Jerry Neville was sitting Indian-style on her bed, quietly peering at her over the monitor of the secured laptop he was cradling in his lap. She smiled weakly and turned back to her own laptop. She clicked on another video explaining the organic chemistry for her test. Soon, she had sunk into a deep and happy concentration, her mechanical pencil scratching notes into the spiral notebook. Once the video ended, she clicked another one. Meghan heard a cough from behind her. It was merely a clearing of the throat. It failed to dislodge her attention from the intricate details of substitution reactions. The next cough, louder this time, arrived several minutes later. Meghan flinched. Before turning around, she glanced at the clock on the corner of her screen. It had been more than an hour since she had ended her phone conversation with her agent. She had almost forgotten that Jerry was there. She spun her desk chair around to offer Neville another feeble smile. From a lifetime of frustrating experience, Neville recognized the distracted look in Meghan's eyes. Mental images of high school girls rebuffing his advances returned to torment him. Without seeing an opportunity to engage her profitably, he returned her smile, folded his laptop, and left the room. Meghan opened her textbook to attempt some practice problems. As she turned to the back of the book to check her solutions, the door creaked open again. Tiptoeing through the barely open door, Neville carried gifts. With small, mincing steps, he approached her desk and placed an offering of packaged snacks and a can of cola on her desk next to her. Meghan looked up at Neville. She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Returning to Meghan's bed, Jerry took up his laptop and pretended to work. He watched for several minutes as Meghan didn't eat the offered snacks. "What's the matter?" he finally asked. "Nothing." "Why aren't you eating?" "The cinnamon rolls have too much sugar." I have to be ready to take movie roles. I thought you just got done telling your agent that you weren't interested in acting. No, I'm just not interested in doing a role where I have to go to Paris, learn a French accent, and portray a strong, independent woman. My agent said that directors are saying my performance in Ravensbane will go a long way to changing gender roles in Hollywood. How did anybody even see my performance? Ravensbane hasn't even been released yet. Neville didn't answer. Anyway, I told him I would only take easy roles. Most of the easy parts mean I have to at least be fit enough to wear that lycra skin suit. The soda's diet, Jerry noted, thrusting his chin in the direction of the can. Sighing, Meghan cracked open the dripping can and took a sip. Opening her desk drawer, she found the napkins she saved from a takeout meal delivered long ago. She wiped away the ring of moisture that the can had deposited onto her desk. Neville muttered something under his breath, and then spoke no more. Meghan at first appreciated the quiet from Neville's end of the room. It helped her study. Soon the silence grew eerie. She glanced back and was relieved to see Neville genuinely engaged with something on his laptop. She returned to the pleasant absorption of her studies. Biting his lower lip, Neville summoned Wingman. The algorithm devised a plan to get Neville that dose of the love and affection he so desperately craved. The computer sent Meghan a message that would stimulate her feelings. After a quarter hour of watching Meghan absorbed in her books, it finally dawned on him. Meghan's laptop was closed. Her phone was powered off. She hadn't even received Wingman's communication. She remained oblivious to Neville's needs. Why the hell are we doing this here? I came all this way to be with you, Neville said. Jerry, you were choppered from your mansion to the airport. Then you were waited on hand and foot as you flew an hour on your private plane. Then you were chauffeured over here. Fine, replied the stunned Neville. But why not study for your exam on the beach? There's no rule that says you have to study in your dorm room. Beach is distracting, too crowded, she said, trying to turn back to the textbook. Really? Neville intoned, staring at Meghan. Soon she realized what he was getting at. We'll be the only ones on my beach. Nobody'll be there to bother you, Neville said. Okay, let's go, Meghan answered after several moments of thought. Neville picked up his phone. Jack, it's me. Get the plane ready at LAX. Make sure there's plenty of fuel. We're flying over the Pacific. Finishing his flight plans, Neville hung up. Nobody will bother you on my plane either. Pack your books. Meghan obeyed. Article 2, Section 21. Apartment, Indianapolis suburbs, 2 years before Election Day. Bang, bang, bang! Jonathan Hall looked at his clock. It was 4:12 a.m. Bang, bang, bang! This time, the banging was followed up by a mechanical chuck, 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 chuck. Hall got out of bed, pulled on his shirt, and walked down the hall to the apartment door. Kevin followed. Bang, bang, bang! Chuck, 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 chuck. After each series of bangs that shook the door on its hinges, the doorknob twisted back and forth with a metallic chuck, 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 chuck. Open up! Shouted the voice on the other side of the door. What's this in regards to? Hall called out through the door, trying to sound calm. FBI! We're here to serve a search warrant and arrest warrant! Open up! The voice shouted again. Hall moved his face closer to the door to try to get a look through the peephole. He wanted to be sure the people on the other side were who they said they were. Bang, bang, bang! Chuck, 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 chuck. The peephole vibrated visibly each time the door was pounded. Hall thought better of his idea to look through it. If the hammering blows that convulsed the door busted it from its hinges, it would surely break his nose. This is your last chance to open up before we break down the door! Shouted the voice. Hall unlocked the door and backed away from it. This time, the bang, bang, bang was followed by the smooth turning of the doorknob. The door flew open, and 7 brawny men in military helmets, ballistic vests, goggles, and balaclavas rushed through the doorway. Hunched in their armor like giant speedy turtles, the tactical team advanced down the hallway. The short barrels of their rifles pointed squarely at Hall and Kevin. Even squinting, Hall could barely make out their silhouettes. Mounted under the barrels of each rifle was a flashlight, blazing its beam into Hall and Kevin's faces. Hall backed up as fast as he could, bumping into Kevin as he did so. Let me see your hands! Let me see your hands! their leader shouted. Like the others, his bulletproof vest proudly bore the insignia of the FBI. Unlike the others, the communication equipment that adorned his gear was supplemented by a helmet-mounted camera. When they reached the living room, the team fanned out through the apartment and invaded each room one by one. "Clear!" they shouted as each room was found to contain no threats. The team leader remained in the living room with one of his subordinates. With a gloved hand, he grabbed Hall by the left wrist. His grip was as stiff and strong as iron manacles. The exact move the SWAT officer made was a blur to Hall. Whatever it was thudded him to the floor, chest first. On the way to the ground, the officer had captured Hall's right wrist. Unable to use his arms to break his fall, Hall's face smacked into the carpet, bloodying his nose and rattling his teeth. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, Hall heard a thud next to him. He turned his head, only to observe Kevin landing not far away, handcuffed in the same position. With a knee in his back, slowing his breathing, Hall looked around his apartment. He was soon dizzied by the flashlight beams dancing around the walls. An armored officer stepped crisply up to the leader, still kneeling on Hall's back. "The apartment is secure," he reported. "Help me get him up," the leader said. The two officers grabbed Hall under his upper arms and pulled him to his feet. Keeping a watchful eye on Hall, they picked up Kevin. The SWAT team then grabbed 2 dining room chairs and sat Hall and Kevin on them. "For your safety and for ours, we're going to have this officer sit with you," the leader explained as he pointed his flashlight directly into Hall's face. "You do not have to speak to him. We just want to see you calm," he continued as Hall squinted blindly. "Yeah, I'm fine," Hall muttered, trying to sound calm enough to get the officer to leave. The team leader held the beam in Hall's face for another half minute before he finally left. Without the flashlight beam glaring into his eyes, bright spots of color splotched all over Hall's field of vision. He mashed his eyelids shut in several long, energetic blinks, trying to clear his vision. Hall and Kevin looked at each other. "What the hell is going on, Jonathan?" Kevin hissed. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "We'll find out soon, I guess," Hall said. Through the open apartment door, Hall noticed a flicker of flashbulbs in the pre-dawn gloom. It wasn't long before a tall, middle-aged man, dressed in a neatly pressed business suit, strode in. The man had a fresh shave, and his hair was impeccably groomed. "I'm U.S. Attorney Randolph Sackett," he said, when he reached the 2 bleary-eyed young men. "I'm here to serve this." With that, the man tossed a thin packet into Hall's lap. "It's a search warrant and a warrant for the arrest of one Jonathan Hall," the man said. Written in capital letters across the top of the document were the words, "Search warrant upon oral testimony." The papers had come from the United States District Court, Southern District of Indiana. It authorized the FBI to search the premises known as see Attachment A for property that was being concealed there, namely, see Attachment B. The paper also proclaimed that the premises could be searched at any time in the day or night because the U.S. Attorney who has sworn the affidavit has demonstrated good cause therefore under Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure 41E. The document was signed by Magistrate Judge Raina Felt. His hands cuffed, Hall couldn't turn the pages to find out what premises were described in Attachment A or what property was covered by Attachment B. The apartment was a scene of wholesale destruction. In his bedroom, every drawer in the bureau was yanked out and dumped onto the floor. The covers of his bed and its sheets had been tugged off and inspected. In the kitchen, Hall saw an officer open up the refrigerator and sweep out its entire contents onto the floor. One by one, he picked up packets of food and opened them with his pocket knife. "What the hell is he doing?" Hall demanded. "We have probable cause to believe that this apartment has evidence of a crime that you committed. We're searching the apartment for any electronic data storage devices. Those things are small. You could have hidden them anywhere." "That's freaking bullshit!" Kevin yelled, drawing the attention of the officers conducting the search. The officer assigned to keep the pair quiet turned angrily to Hall. "Kevin, now's not the time," Hall whispered. "When this is over, we'll sue the living hell out of them." Hall's comment quieted Kevin down. The agent guarding the pair snorted in amusement as he listened to them. After another 10 minutes, the officer guarding the two began to look impatient. He pushed a button, activating the communication mic on his shoulder. "Do we have the van yet?" he demanded. 5 more minutes, came the answer from the speaker. Hall hunched forward. It was becoming more difficult for him to breathe. The van the officer spoke of was most likely a prisoner transport van. He tried to sit up straighter in the chair, but his hands cuffed behind him made it hard to lean back. After what seemed like far more than 5 minutes, sitting there in his torn t-shirt and pajama bottoms, Hall's wait ended. A pair of officers dressed in FBI raid jackets approached the two young men. "This one," said the SWAT officer who had been guarding the pair, pointing at Hall. Hall stood up. "Can I at least get dressed?" he asked. "No." "Can you at least get me my shoes?" "Fine. Where are they?" "You'll find a pair in the closet," Hall said, sitting back down. A raid jacket-clad officer went to retrieve Hall's shoes. He came back with the pair of sneakers and dropped them in front of Hall. "Can you help me put them on?" Rather than answer, the officer silently stared at Hall. "I'm handcuffed. Can you help me get them on?" Still, no answer. Hall sighed and thrust his feet, one at a time, into his shoes. Without the help of his manacled hands, he managed to crush the stiff leather collar at the back of each shoe. As he was twisting his feet around in the shoes to straighten out the leather that dug into his heels, the officers in the windbreakers pulled him out of his chair by the upper arms. "Come with us." With that, Hall was escorted out of the apartment and into the lightning storm of camera flashes waiting for him outside. Somebody had obviously notified the press of the arrest. The temptation to hide his face grew strong as he was escorted into the crush of newspapermen, pointing microphones at him and shouting their questions. Stepping gingerly to avoid leaving behind a poorly secured shoe, Hall said nothing. Gaping in anticipation for him at the end of the crowd was a double-mouthed entrance to the prisoner transport truck. The van's outer hatch consisted of ordinary van doors. Sealing the prisoner compartment inside was a sturdy steel cage. A partition divided the cage in half. Along the entire length of the van's bulkhead ran a bench. Climbing on to the diamond plate steel floor, Hall sat himself down, careful not to lose his balance, now that his cuffed hands couldn't steady him. The flashes of the cameras continued to pursue him until the two sets of doors slammed shut. I truly hope that you've enjoyed immersing yourself in the world of the Kingmaker series as much as I've enjoyed crafting it. I'd love it if you could show your appreciation for my years of hard work by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. Your support means the world to me, and it gives me a reason to keep creating. Our journey, however, has only just begun. Due Process, the next book in our series, is already available on Amazon. In it, you will meet wonderful new characters, and you'll find out, what does Neville have up his sleeve? What clever deceptions will Mei Hua execute? Can Jonathan Hall untangle the web of deception? And do he and his friends have what it takes to expose what he finds to the world? Your support is more than just a click. Even your kind words down in the comments keep me going. If you really want to help me, consider writing a review on Amazon as well. I'm going to serialize the audiobook for Due Process. See the links down below for more information. Until we meet again, I want to thank you one last time.